for better days to come and carry us like wind in our sails. Hold on tight, I can smell the shore, it's right in front of us if we just hold on tight. This vision that I saw is getting closer every dawn. We are dreamers of the shore. 7 years now on this boat, and we all know where we belong. Just wait. For our home to show on the horizon, soon we'll be there. Hold on tight, I can smell the shore, it's right in front of us if we just hold on tight. This vision that I saw is getting closer every dawn. We are dreamers of the shore when we can't read the sky. We just sail with the wind that we've got, and when we're drowning in doubt.
Hi everyone, you're all very welcome to episode number 8 of the Fraoch Knits knitting podcast. It's been a while, so it's taken me a little bit of time to set this up and to, I suppose, pluck up the courage to do another podcast, because it seems like ages since I've done one. It was actually, I think the 19th of December was the last time I did a podcast. So so here I am. It's January, the end of January, the 29th. I have some light, hopefully it won't fade before we finish talking, and you're all really welcome here. It's so lovely to have the beautiful people that I have watching my podcast and interested in the knitting and the chat. So normally I follow the format of looking at works in progress and finished objects and all that sort of thing, and I'm going to do something a little bit different today, and I'm going to focus a little bit on the history of the Aran sweater. And it sounds a little bit maybe too much to call it the history, because there's so much to it actually when I started reading it up, and really actually it's just my thoughts on the Aran sweater and the Aran style. So that's what I'm going to look at today, and I think if there's time at the end I'll show you a few things that I've been knitting in January. I hope you all had a really good Christmas and nice holidays, and that you're all relaxed after that, and that the energy is coming back. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Irish festival of St. Bridget, also known as Imbolc. It's one of the 4 cardinal points of the year in the traditional Celtic calendar, and that's coming up next Wednesday on the 1st of February. And so there's a lot to talk about. I don't think I forgot to tell you anything. I'm on Ravelry as Fraoch Knits, at Fraoch Knits, and I'm also on Instagram. So I haven't posted very much on Instagram recently, but if you want to see my works in progress and things as they're going along, you can follow me there. Yeah, so it's really lovely to have you here again with me, and so I'm going to talk to you about my first finished object, and the sweater that has got me thinking an awful lot about the Aran style, which is of course indigenous to this country and to not very far away from where I live here, but about which I sort of knew very little actually, really. I'm just going to stand up, and hopefully the autofocus will work, and just to show you what the sweater looks like. You can sort of see it there. It's actually turned out really nice. I was a little bit worried about the gauge on it wasn't working out very well for me, so I I soldiered on anyway and just kept continuing. I did more raglan increases than the pattern called for, which has resulted in a little bit of extra fabric here on either side, but actually on the overall grand scheme of things I'm actually quite happy with it. It took me leaving it, this often happens to me, I don't know if it happens to you, but as a knitter, when you finish a jumper that you've worked on for a long time and you're so close to it and you have an image in your head of what you want it to look like and it's not really turning out exactly as you wanted it to turn out, putting it aside for a couple of weeks and not thinking about it maybe is the best thing to do. Certainly it's the only way I can deal with it sometimes, is just to put it to one side and not to get too wound up in maybe the finished object not exactly meeting the requirements that you had hoped for. But I actually love this now and I've been wearing it. I blocked it, the blocking made a huge difference because I think all the cables were quite tight, and they definitely, the whole thing relaxed and loosened out, and I designed it, or I intended to have a few inches of positive ease, which it does have, which I like because it's a really thick jumper and I didn't really want it fitted, but I was a little bit disappointed just with the way the raglans were a little bit loose, and that just gives me a little bit of extra fabric here, as I was saying, but it's really hardly noticeable, so I'm actually quite happy. So the wool is, or the yarn that I used is linen quill, worsted weight linen quill, so 50% Peruvian Highland wool, 35% alpaca and 15% linen. Just gorgeous, gorgeous wool, and I think it's oatmeal is the name of the, yeah, it was oatmeal is the name of the colourway. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my interest in the Aran sweater and Aran style. And so I think it was in November last year I was passing the National Museum of Country Life, which is located near Castlebar, which is about, I'd say, 40 minutes from where I live, or 45 minutes from where I live, and I was popping in there, just I pass it quite often, and I go in, I have a friend who works there, a good knitting friend, hi Barbara if you're watching, and sometimes it's nice to see if I can catch up with her in there. It's also just a brilliant museum, it's fabulous, and I wasn't going specifically to look at the knitting section, but I ended up finding myself in the knitting section of the Museum of Country Life, and on display were about 3 or 4 Aran pieces of Aran knitwear. So because I was knitting the Billie Pullover at the time, and I was interested in the history in finding a little bit more about the history of Aran knitting, I actually couldn't believe I found myself looking at these pieces that had been knit in the 1930s. So they were knit by islanders, presumably, possibly Inishmore, the biggest of the Aran Islands, and I think they were specifically knit for the museum. And they, what was really interesting about them was the fact that they looked very different to what I would understand, or a lot of people would think of as an Aran sweater these days, in terms of the thickness of the wool particularly, and also in terms of one of them, the shaping of it was very 1930s, very stylish, very up to date, with waist shaping and all sorts of shaping to give it a 1930s sort of silhouette. So it was a woman's jumper. So anyway, the biggest thing that struck me though was the fact that the wool that was used was definitely not Aran weight. So I was thinking, well, where does the word Aran weight come from in terms of a wool weight? And certainly it does come from the Aran sweater, but it seems that that weight of wool only actually came much later in the development of the Aran sweater. And my initial thoughts were, was it to do with commercialization, that it's quicker for hand knitters particularly to knit a sweater with Aran weight wool than it is to knit it with a 4-ply or fingering weight wool, which is what the sweaters in the National Museum seem to be knit from. And it turns out that actually that's what I've read, is that it was a commercial sort of evolution, perhaps more than a decision at any specific point in time, that a heavier weight of wool would be used. But traditionally the wool that was used was probably closer to a 4-ply. and so you can imagine how much time went into them. And the look for me is actually much nicer. This much thinner sort of fabric, and much more delicate. And there are some absolutely beautiful images from the 1950s of gorgeous Aran sweaters that were knit using this lighter wool. So that's just where my interest, I suppose, in the whole topic came from. And so then I started reading, and I read, there are 2 publications which talk about the history of the sweater, right up from when it actually, when the style began. And that's another thing, that the style it's not an ancient style, which I think that a lot of marketing has sort of given the impression that it is much older than it is. It actually only dates to the 1930s, actually, to the beginning, the early 20th century. And if you look at I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this famous film that has just come out of Ireland by director Martin McDonagh, called The Banshees of Inisherin, which is doing really, really well. And in terms of awards, it's won Golden Globes and it's been nominated for a whole load of Oscars. And so yeah, it's a very good film, by the way, if you get a chance to watch it. Definitely do. It's very dark, a dark comedy, and typical Martin McDonagh, and it's set in Inishmore, so it's set in one of the Aran Islands, and the biggest of the Aran Islands. And it's notable that so the film is really authentic in terms of how it shows the interiors. No electric light. There was no electric light on the islands until 1973, I think, they got electricity. So all of this knitting would have been done by paraffin lamps, and often they had to wash the smell of the paraffin out of the jumpers before they were sold. But so yeah, the Banshees of Inisherin, it's interesting to note that nobody is wearing an Aran jumper. So that film was set in the 1920s, and of course the whole Aran thing didn't really start to evolve until the 1930s. But what was present on the islands was the typical Gansey. So the Irish word for a jumper is actually Gansey, which is interesting to compare it to Norwegian Genser, and the probably both stemming from the word Guernsey, which is one of the Channel Islands, and this is where the tradition of the fisherman's jumper came from, the Guernsey. And so that has a whole really long established tradition all over the UK, all over England and Scotland. And it turns out that actually this style of knitting, the Guernsey, with textured cable work and moss stitch patterns and honeycomb and that type of thing probably came from the Gansey. I'm not sure about the kind of honeycomb stitch now that I mention it, but certainly cables and moss stitch, and on very, very fine needles, knitted very fine needles at a very, very tight gauged, with very fine wool, to be watertight, to be waterproof. So these were generally decorated only from the chest up, and this is something that was present on the Aran Islands in the west of Ireland in the prior to the 1930s. This is definitely a jumper that was worn, but it was usually worn in a blue colour, so it was dyed indigo. It wasn't the Vawn white that the Aran eventually became. So this is where the tradition started. It started with the Gansey, or the Guernsey, and it evolved from there. But even right up to the 1950s, so I'll put up a photograph from one of the books, which I'll also link all of this information down below. There's a photograph showing children in their first Holy Communion outfits. So they would be aged around 7 or 8, and the boys all traditionally wore, on the Aran Islands, wore a Gansey in Vawn, which is literally white wool, a Vawn Gansey. And they, I think there's a row of about 10 kids, 10 boys, and most of them, all but 2 of them, are actually wearing jumpers that have the stitchwork patterning only from the chest up. So it's in the tradition of the Channel Islands, Guernsey. But but two of them are wearing the all-over patterns that became established as the what we now know as an Aran sweater, like the Billie Pullover that I'm wearing. And so the development really of the whole Aran style came out of this existing tradition, came from the passing on of these, probably through fishermen who were sent by the Congested Districts Board, which was a board set up to help impoverished rural areas in Ireland. So the Congested District Board in the 1930s would have sent fishermen, mostly from Scotland, to pass on technologies relating to the fishing industry to improve the welfare of the islanders, to pass on this new technology. And it's thought, it's not, nobody really knows where the ideas were picked up, but it's thought that the families and wives of these fishermen passed on the knitting. Or perhaps it wasn't even that, it was just the islanders, the knitters on the islands, observing the ganseys that were worn by the Scottish fishermen. So that's where it's thought that all of this came from. The idea that the patterns came from, dated back to the time of the Book of Kells, has been discredited. There was some German author whose name Heinz Kiva, I think, wrote in the beginning of the 20th century, or the 40s or 50s, wrote that he had established that these patterns were, you could see that there was a monk knitting in one of the, knitting a jumper and stockings in one of the pages of the Book of Kells, and this is where these patterns had come from. Now, and he's since been discredited, that wasn't true. But actually, when you look at what is very Irish about the Aran style is the sculptural quality of the patterns that they're, and I suppose this is helped by the thicker wool as well. But certainly our metalwork and our we have a long tradition of metalwork, stone carving that includes a lot of lace work, a lot of and the Book of Kells, even the decoration in the Book of Kells, a lot of it could be seen to have passed over into the knitting tradition. And it's just this very sculptural, very thick, heavy patterning, and all over patterning as well. So that's very, I suppose, possibly could be said to be very much in the Irish tradition of visual arts, I suppose. So there you go, that's the that's more or less where it came out of, and the way it developed then. So Muriel Gahan would be one of the big names in how the jumper style developed in Ireland. So she was the founder, I think, or one of the first women in the Irish Country Women's Association, and that was founded, her father had been a member of the an official in the Congested Districts Board, so she would have seen all of this effort to help rural Ireland establish itself, and to improve the welfare of people living in rural Ireland. And so she set up the Irish Country Women's Association. I think she set it up, certainly she was involved at the very beginning. And she set up a store in Dublin, a shop in Dublin called the Country Store, I think, and the Country Shop, selling sweaters made by people on the Aran Islands. So she visited the Aran Islands in the 1930s, and she saw that there were women knitting everywhere. So knitting was a huge tradition on the islands. And so yeah, that she paid, so it became something that was encouraged as a professional thing to earn money. And she, in her shop in Dublin, which ran until 1978, it closed in 1978, she sold only sweaters from knitters who lived in the Aran Islands. And then there was another shop and another company, and this was Pádraig and Mary O'Malley from I think Mayo or Galway and Connemara, and they were tasked, the O'Malleys were tasked with producing the costumes for the film The Quiet Man, which dates to 1952, and that's another amazing film in the west of Ireland. I mean, really it sold the Irish landscape to people who there was a huge tourist boom after that film was released, particularly returning immigrants from the United States, who had, I suppose, done well and now with commercial air travel, you know, people could travel more easily. So there was a huge boom in people returning from the States in the 1960s, and this 1952 film really promoted the Aran style. So, and that was the O'Malley's, and they hired women from all over the country, but actually particularly mostly in Mayo and Connemara. But eventually, by this stage in the 1950s, hand knitting was a big thing everywhere in the country. And there's just one little extract that I wanted to read for you of a Limerick woman who talks about there being ads in newspapers for knitters, and yeah, it was something that you knew you could get well paid for, and it was just, hand knitting was a big thing all over the country. So this woman, her name was Noni Holmes, and she recalls knitting with her two sisters as a young woman in the 1950s. Hello again, and I'm sorry I got interrupted there with changing the card, because actually it only takes a 20-minute section of footage. So I just missed out on one last thing that I was going to tell you about, which is so this is the book that I've been taking most of the information from, and it's Vawn Corrigan's Irish Aran History, Tradition and Fashion. And the other book is Alice Starmore's Aran Knitting. Both of them really good histories of the Aran tradition and the Aran style in sweater knitting. So I wanted to just read you a little bit. I think I had been talking about the fact that by the 1950s, there was a huge tradition, a huge industry of women knitting at home and getting paid for it, and shops all over the country really selling hand knit Aran sweaters. So just wanted to read you this beautiful little passage from Vawn Corrigan's book, and it was written by artists. It's recorded from a Limerick woman, Noni Holmes, who recalls knitting with her two sisters as a young woman in the 1950s. So she says, "There were advertisements in the papers all the time in those days. Knitters wanted, and they'd meet us and give us the wool and the patterns. We were all knit, and 'twas great money. We used Blarney Woolen Mill's 4-ply wool mostly. If we had knit a jumper for 12 ounces, we would get 12 shillings. If there was a hurry, the three of us would knit the same jumper. Breda was a loose knitter and I was a tight knitter, so she would have to use thinner needles or it would never fit together at the end. Arans take a lot of wool, so the local people couldn't afford to buy them. We worked without patterns because we'd been doing it for so long. They tucked away in the jumpers to make sure we hadn't taken any of the wool, as we used to keep aside a small bit for putting a stripe into a jumper of our own if we could. They washed them after they were knitted, as they smelled of paraffin from our lamps and smoke from our fires. We knit because we had to make money, and I taught other girls just out of kindness so they could too." So I think that's a really lovely passage that just tells you how big the tradition had become, and how incredible it was that they knit without patterns, that they often had a family of 3 women in the family, 3 sisters, knitting the same jumper with different gauges, not different gauges, the same gauge, but different tensions, and having to use different size needles. So really sophisticated knitting going on, and but the fact that they couldn't afford them, I think that's really interesting. And that was very much the case, I think, that is shown in the photograph of the boys in the 1950s, that they were worn as a special occasion garment. So the Aran sweater wasn't a working sweater, it wasn't a fisherman's sweater. And the whole idea that this myth that has grown up around the fact that you could tell which family the fisherman was from if a fisherman drowned in wearing a sweater, that the cable patterns or the mix of stitches would tell you which family they were from. And that's actually all myth, because they were never actually worn as working jumpers. They were for special occasions. Just the amount of wool that was required to knit them, they were, and the amount of time that it took to knit them, and that money could be made by selling them and not keeping them in the family. So yeah, that's just really interesting, and that passage from the 1950s really just confirms all of those things. And I know there are commercial websites out there that are selling Aran knitwear, and that are stating that you can tell which clan you're from by the stitch patterns. Like is there a Doyle stitch pattern and an O'Malley one? And actually, I'm sorry to burst anybody's bubble, but that doesn't exist. It's not a thing. There are traditions though around the meaning behind the different stitch patterns, like the honeycomb stitch, which is this main stitch in the middle of Billie Pullover. That the honeycomb stitch is represents hard work, or the results of your hard work, and abundance and wealth, like the land of milk and honey. So that it's definitely related to an idea, a symbol. And the same with the cables, supposed to be ropes. This I think is like the tree of life, which is supposed to be obviously representing the importance of family, the importance of the Irish mammy. So yeah, that's really what's most important. And I suppose the other thing about the stitch patterns is that they are interpreted differently all over the country and all over the world. There is no definitive dictionary or glossary that you can go to that will tell you the absolute, this stitch means this or symbolises this or that. That actually it's open to interpretation, and that's very much an Irish thing, that nothing is set in stone, that everything's very fluid, and it's all about imagination and poetry, and the use of the imagination. Everything is fluid. So I think that's a lovely thing to remember when you're knitting a jumper, using these stitches, that you can interpret them whatever way you want, and but certainly there are traditional interpretations that differ from place to place. So that's it. I will insert the footage now of my trip to the National Museum, and you'll be able to see the jumpers there that were knit in the 1930s. And interesting as well, in that passage from the 1950s, that they were using 4-ply wool. So this whole thing of the thick Aran wool really must only have started in the 60s, because I think that maybe it was when it moved away from hand knitting and into commercial knitting. Who knows when the thicker wool became synonymous with Aran knitting, with the Aran sweater. Anyhow, it's lovely to see how things have kept going, that tradition, and how it's coming back again. Or the Aran sweater is becoming fashionable again, partly because of the success of this film, apparently, of the Banshees of Inisherin, even though there's nobody in the film wearing an Aran sweater. So it's just amazing how ideas travel, and how they evolve and develop, and that nothing is really, you can't really pin anything down, particularly with this tradition. It's just very, nobody really knows where it came from. But it definitely evolved through sort of an Irish vision and an Irish aesthetic, I suppose you could say. And that's it. So enjoy the footage, and after that I'll be doing a little bit on my works in progress.
is real. Maybe we should hurry up and seal the deal. Oh, oh, I just wanna love you right. Oh, oh, love you till the end of time. I just wanna hold you for forever. Every day you're making me better. 'Cause a love like this is rare, and I wanna take you there. I would give it all away to do it all again. Make our love a story that would never end. Never thought I'd feel so alive, looking in your eyes. I just wanna love you till the day I die. Oh, oh, I just wanna love you right. Oh, oh, love you till the end of time. I just wanna hold you for forever. Every day you're making me better. 'Cause a love like this is rare, and I wanna take you there. If I'm gonna love somebody, I just wanna love you. If I'm gonna love somebody, I just wanna love you. If I'm gonna love somebody, I just wanna love you. If I'm gonna love somebody, I just wanna love you. Oh, oh, I just wanna love you.